Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, I'll give you my second half predictions, where I think the Timberwolves will finish record wise, and also where in the West I think they'll finish. I want to talk about three predictions for the second half of the season. We'll close the show by talking about the Wolves-Grizzlies matchup Thursday night. It is game day, so we'll preview the Wolves-Grizzlies matchup. It's all coming up on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm also the editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site on the Fansided Network. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy game day. The Timberwolves take on the Grizzlies tonight for the first game in, 9 days or so. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to preview Wolves-Grizzlies here at the end of the show today, but plenty to get to first, second half predictions. My final prediction as to what the Timberwolves' final record will be, as well as where they'll finish in the Western Conference standings. That's all upcoming on the show here today. So it's a packed show. We get you back to Timberwolves action tonight, and of course the post-game pod later this evening following Wolves-Grizzlies. So exciting to get back to actual Timberwolves basketball. As fun as the All-Star break was, and it was a lot of fun, it's time for actual Timberwolves games to talk about. We're going to get to all that here today. Thank you, first of all, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. A reminder that the show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, so coming out of the All-Star break, I want to spend today's show talking about predictions for the second half of the season. I have three. I don't know how bold they really are, but I'm just going to give you three predictions that I'm pretty certain are going to come true here in the second half of the season for the Timberwolves. The unofficial second half, of course, the schedule is actually 70% of the way over. There's only 23 regular season games left for the Timberwolves, but I want to give my predictions, three predictions, where I think they'll finish record-wise as well as in the standings. We'll get to Wolves-Grizzlies here at the end of the show as well. So that's all upcoming. Let's start with the rest of the season thing. So I talked on, I guess it was Tuesday's show, about how I thought the Wolves would finish February. Remember, back at the beginning of the month, I said they'd finish, what was it, like 9-6, I think it was, for the month. And as long as they go at least 1-2 over the last three games, that's gonna happen. And I think that's the case. Now you look at the rest of the schedule this season for the Timberwolves, and just based on the schedule, it's fairly feasible for the Timberwolves to finish, to have a well above maybe not well above 500, to have a above 500 post All-Star break record, right? The schedule isn't all that intimidating moving forward. They've got the three consecutive back-to-back sets here following the All-Star break. So they've got back-to-back Thursday, Friday. They get 2 days off, then they get another back-to-back. They get 2 more days off, then they get another back-to-back. So insanely enough, the first 6 games all come as part of back-to-backs for the Wolves. And then they only have one more back-to-back the rest of the season. So after they get through Memphis, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Golden State, Oklahoma City, Portland, the first 2 are, of course, almost impossible back-to-backs. And for the Wolves to go 2-2 over those 4 games would be great. And then you get Oklahoma City and Portland, an away and a home, which is very winnable. But after that, you get Portland again, you get Oklahoma City again, you get Orlando. They've still got the Spurs on the schedule. They've still got they've got Houston on the schedule. They got Washington who's struggling, the Spurs again. So it really half the games are against teams that the Wolves will definitely be favored against. And the rest of them, are certainly winnable. I mean, the Wolves have already beaten the Bucks once. They get the Bucks again. They've already played the Lakers very well. They've beaten them 2 out of 3 times. They get them again. They get, I mentioned Toronto. That's a winnable game. The Bulls, I think, in the last game of the year, I mean, that's certainly going to be a challenge, but perhaps the Wolves have more to play for at that point than the Bulls. I just think the second part of the schedule sets up nicely for the Timberwolves. Coming out of the All-Star break, the Wolves are 3 games above 500. The rest of the way, I mean, what do I have? The rest of the way here, I've got the Wolves going. You include the rest of February, and then all of March and the first part of April. I've got the Wolves going roughly 13-10 in the second half of the season total, the rest of the way. So 23 games left. I think they'll go right around 13-10. That puts their final record at 44-38. So I'm predicting the Wolves win 44 games. Before the season, you might remember that their over under was set at, I think it was 36.5 or 37.5 at betonline.net. I took the hard over on that. I thought for sure they would be over. I thought they'd win 42, 43 games. I thought their ceiling was probably 44 or 45 games. They're going to be right in that range. And I need to go back and pull exactly. Maybe I'll even run a clip from that episode just to prove. You go back and listen to it back in mid October. I said the Wolves would be right around or just above the 500 mark. And sitting here today, post All-Star break, I'm predicting that they win 44 games. So 44-38 would, of course, be, I mean, I guess at that point, what, 3 games above 500, but right in line with what I said, maybe a game or two better than where I predicted they would be at the start of the season. Now, where does that put them in the grand scheme of things in the Western Conference? I want to get to that next, where I think they'll finish in terms of their seeding in the Western Conference, because that has a lot to do with where I think the teams right ahead of them are going to finish. The Dallas Mavericks currently at 5, the Denver Nuggets at 6. If you listen to the Roundtable podcast, and hopefully you did, that was Wednesday's episode of Locked On Wolves. I spoke with we did a roundtable, the hosts of Locked On Mavericks, Locked On Clippers, Locked On Lakers, and Locked On Nuggets. And I actually came around to Matt Moore from Locked On Nuggets. I came around to his line of thinking about what's going to happen in the Western Conference. So I want to talk about that here next, as well as 2 other takeaways, 2 other key, or I guess predictions really, for the unofficial second half of the season for the Timberwolves. So we're going to do that here next. First of all, though, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is full steam ahead for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach might land, betonline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, thank you again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. For for your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. All right, so 3 takeaways for the second half of the Timberwolves season. Again, the unofficial second half, only 23 games to play. But I'll give you 3 takeaways, or I guess more accurately, 3 predictions for the second half of the season. Number 1, Karl-Anthony Towns will make the All-NBA team, probably the 3rd team. I think he's got an outside shot at the 2nd team. Uh, I think so. He's only made All-NBA once, and that was the Jimmy Butler season way back in the 2017-18 year. He was an All-Star the following year, but did not make All-NBA. I do think he cracks the All-NBA team this year. And I just think, first of all, as fair or unfair, the team's success thing is going to be a big piece of it, right? If the Wolves are a playoff team, or in, even get the chance to maybe get out of the play-in conversation in the West and get up to the 6th seed, for instance, I do think Karl-Anthony Towns is named All-NBA. The numbers, even though it's not quite 2010, it's close, and it may end that way. He's 24.4 points, 9.7 rebounds per game. But overall, the shooting numbers are up from last year. They're actually his overall shooting numbers, like across the board, are as high as they've been since his first All-Star year, which was also his All-NBA season. His effective field goal percentage is just a hair under 59%. That All-NBA season, he was 59.6% in terms of effective field goal percentage. I think he gets back to there by the end of the season. I think he continues to be more efficient. If the Timberwolves continue to win, everybody across the board pretty much thinks that Towns has improved defensively. I don't think there's any question about that. He's committed himself defensively. If he leads this team as the lone all-star on the team, especially if he leads them out of the play-in, I think he makes All-NBA. I think that he will be recognized for his work defensively, even if the raw, per game rebound numbers are down slightly. I think the voters will be detailed and nuanced enough to understand that all around Towns has improved this season. And we're going to continue to see that. As long as what we've seen basically since January 1st, if that continues for Towns over the final 6 weeks or so of the season, then I don't see how he doesn't end up making an All-NBA team, likely All-NBA 3rd team. But I mean, he will get rewarded for that. I truly believe that. My second prediction for the second half of the season, I do think the Timberwolves will finish with a top 10 offense and a top 15 defense league wide. Now, where do they sit currently, you ask? I'll use the basketball reference numbers. I know NBA.com is slightly different. I think NBA.com has the Wolves at ninth in offensive efficiency. Basketball Reference has them at 10th. Defensive rating, I believe that NBA's Get.com has them 15 or 16. Basketball Reference has the Wolves at 17th in defensive rating. I think the Wolves will get up into the top 15 in defensive rating and stay in the top 10 in terms of offensive rating. I think that the defense is maybe not quite as good as we saw earlier in the season, but it's better than what we've seen the last 3 or 4 weeks. I think the offense is certainly better than it was at the start of the season, and is probably about as good as we've seen the last 3 or 4 weeks. I said this before the season. I thought the Wolves had a shot at being a top 5 offense this year. I don't know at this point, 70% of the way through the games on the schedule, that's necessarily going to happen unless they just are insanely hot the rest of the way. But I think it will be a top 10 offense. It's currently 10th in terms of offensive rating. I think it stays in the top 10. Likely it's probably 7, 8, 9, something like that. But Karl-Anthony Towns in Chris Finch's offense, which is very versatile and adaptable, plus D'Angelo Russell, who's shooting not quite career lows in terms of shooting percentages, but as bad as he shot in 4 years, that's going to come up a little bit. Anthony Edwards, hopefully getting some rest over the All-Star break, getting a little bit more healthy, and continue to improve overall, continue to improve his outside shot. I think all those things work together. The cohesiveness of this unit that's now been together for the last basically year, I think that adds up to this Timberwolves team being a top 10 offensive unit. I think the defense stabilizes a little bit with some rest here over the All-Star break. Hopefully some increased health, maybe a refocus on the defensive end of the floor. And I think that gets the Timberwolves to a top 15 defense. I think that on some level the turnover rate that continues to be the league's best turnover rate in terms of forcing opponents to commit turnovers. I think that on some level is sustainable. It may not finish the year at number 1, but it's also going to lead to those games, those one-offs that you just simply can't turn the other team over, and the half-court defense isn't good enough, and it's going to make the Wolves ultimately kind of a middle of the pack. Maybe a little bit better than that defense. Maybe they're 14th, maybe they're 13th when the season's all said and done. But I do think it's a top 15 defense and a top 10 offense when we write the story of the season. And of course, that's going to lend itself to a pretty solid record. And I said earlier, I thought the Wolves would finish with 44 wins this season, 44-38 as their overall win-loss record. And where does that put them in the West? Well, Matt Moore of Locked On Nuggets made the case on our roundtable discussion on Wednesday. He thought the Timberwolves would be the 6th seed in the West, but he wasn't saying that his Nuggets, the team he covers, was going to drop to number 7. He was suggesting that the Dallas Mavericks plummet from currently number 5 in the Western Conference down to number 7 in the Western Conference. That would be currently Dallas is in 5th. They're 1.5 games ahead of Denver and 4 full games ahead of the Timberwolves, who are in 7th. So that would mean they fall at least 4 games out of the top 6 in the Western Conference, and the Timberwolves would jump up into 6. Denver would slide up into 5. Initially, I thought that was kind of crazy because in my mind, and I said this on the show on Wednesday on the roundtable, it all kind of hinges on how Jamal Murray reacclimates, assuming he's back in the next 3 to 4 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. If you believe, if you listen to what Matt at Locked On Nuggets said, if Jamal Murray's back in the next 2 to 3 weeks and he acclimates himself well to the team, the rotation gets figured out. Maybe the Nuggets bench improves a little with some reshuffling of the lineup and the rotation. Then if that doesn't work out, then Denver very easily could fall back 2 games behind the Timberwolves. The Wolves are 2-1 against Denver this year. They've got 1 more game. The Wolves could still get the tiebreaker against the Nuggets, believe it or not, and that would certainly impact that. But the more I thought about it, I tend to agree with what Matt said about the Mavericks. I mean, Mavericks, of course, trading away Kristaps Porzingis, trying to reintegrate 2 new players to the lineup. One in Davis Bertans, who's a shooter who hasn't really shot the ball well this year, and Spencer Dinwiddie, who's had his own issues as well. Can Dallas integrate those guys into the rotation? Losing Porzingis, who's a really important part to their defense, and Dallas's defense has been surprisingly good this season anyway. They're probably due for some regression. They've been one of the league's better defenses, and they weren't very good the last couple of years defensively. So why all of a sudden are they so good? Do we really need to give Jason Kidd that much credit? We talked about this a little bit on Wednesday as well. But the more I thought about it, the more I think it's likely that Dallas slides back a couple of spots. Denver kind of stays the same, maybe improves a little once Jamal Murray gets up to speed, and the Wolves continue their process of improving overall as a team. And I think they can make up a little bit of that gap there. And the question is, can the Wolves, what did I say they'd go the rest of the way? 13 and 10 the rest of the way. Will Dallas lose enough games to make 13 and 10 enough of a mark to get the Wolves into the top six? I tend to think yes. I think Dallas is going to scuffle a little bit in the second half of the season. I think that Denver finishes fifth. I think Utah probably hangs on to the 4 spot. Denver's got a shot at getting up to 4. Utah's got obviously their own problems. But say Utah holds on to 4, Denver goes up to 5, the Wolves get up to 6, Dallas slides down into 7. And then, of course, the Wolves in the 6th spot would then be facing whoever's third. And at this point, it's pretty likely that's the Memphis Grizzlies, who are a game and a half behind Golden State for the 2 spot and 4 games ahead of Utah for 4. So it's either going to be Golden State or Memphis, more likely than not. But I wouldn't be too psyched about facing Memphis in the first round. I think that they're going to feel like they have a lot to prove and come out gangbusters in the first round of the playoffs. But at any rate, that's a conversation for another day. We have plenty of time to talk about the potential playoff matchups for the Timberwolves. But in my mind, I think the Wolves get up to 6. I think Dallas slides to 7 and Denver gets up to 5. And the Wolves win 44 games. And again, a decade and a half ago, in 2005, 44 games was a game out of the playoffs. This year, that could very easily be the 6th seed in the Western Conference and not be too far out of the 5 seed in the Western Conference. So that's kind of my overall prediction for the rest of the season. So 13 and 10 the rest of the way. I think they win 44 games. I think the Wolves finish 6th. I'm going to put Denver at 5 and Dallas at 7 in the West. I think everybody else kind of holds their spots. Portland may fall out at 10 in favor of the Spurs. I wouldn't be shocked if the Spurs grabbed the 10 seed over Portland. But we'll see how that shakes out. But that's my prediction for the rest of the way. Not far off from what I said before the season. Remember, before the season, I said 42, 43, ceiling of 44 to 45 wins for the Wolves. And I thought that they likely would be a 7 or 8 seed, best case scenario 6. It's kind of where we're sitting right now. Maybe if I'm a game optimistic, 2 games optimistic from here to the rest of the way, we're going to finish right where I thought we would, right where I thought the Wolves would in the preseason prediction show. I thought the Wolves would finish where they very likely could end up. So looking back on that, I feel pretty good about that prediction. Obviously, hoping for relative health the rest of the way, but it's certainly attainable for the Wolves to get up to number 6. All right, let's finish today's show by looking at the matchup against the Memphis Grizzlies on Thursday night. We haven't seen the Grizzlies in a little while, but this will be the 4th and final time that the Timberwolves and Grizzlies face off this season. So I want to do that here next. First, though, before we get to it, let's talk about our friends over at rockauto.com. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com both at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you could possibly need, from brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil to even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solutions your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, let's close the show up by talking about Wolves-Grizzlies. It's been a little while since we've seen Memphis. It's been about 5 weeks. Mid-January is the last time the Timberwolves faced the Grizzlies. Of course, way back early in the season, the Wolves led the first game against Memphis, going to the fourth quarter by, I think it was double digits, actually. Memphis used a big fourth quarter and beat the Wolves in a game that the Timberwolves really should have won. The next time around, though, the Wolves completely waxed the Grizzlies by 43 points, actually, which has to have been the worst loss for the Grizzlies this season. Of course, Memphis, one of the best 4 or 5 teams in the entire NBA this year. And then last time around was mid-January. The Wolves led that game by 7 at halftime. Memphis had a big third quarter and then held off a Wolves surge kind of mid-late fourth quarter to win that game by 8. And that's a pretty good game to look at. The Wolves were full strength in that game, essentially. Obviously a couple weeks after the health and safety protocol stuff, Memphis was full strength. The Timberwolves, the only real difference in terms of the rotation is Jordan McLaughlin was a DNP-CD in that game. Of course, he's now part of the rotation. But otherwise, the Wolves were full strength. Karl-Anthony Towns had 25 and 9 in that game. D'Angelo Russell had 29 points on 19 shots. Anthony Edwards led the way in terms of scoring, was a game high 30 points in that game on 9 of 20 shooting, made 5 threes on 11 attempts. And Jared Vanderbilt almost had a double double and had 8 and 13. The Wolves bench did basically nothing. This was your classic big three and nobody else game. The Wolves' big three combined for the majority of their points. Nobody else had more than 8 points. And Vando had 8. Nobody else had more than 4 points for the Wolves. So the Timberwolves' big three scored what is that, 55, scored 84 of their 108 points. Vando had 8. Nobody else had more than 4. Patrick Beverley shot just 1 of 9. The bench combined to score just 13 points. 13 points for the Timberwolves bench on what is that, 28 shots or 26 shots. So 13 points on 26 shots for the Timberwolves bench in that game. And Memphis completely leaned on. This was, you might remember this is the weird John Conchar game off the bench. He hit 3 threes on 7 attempts, had 15 and 17 off the bench for Memphis. Just an insane performance from Conchar. And Jaren Jackson had 20. Desmond Bane had 21. And John Morant, the Wolves actually defended him fairly well. He had 16-9, but he turned it over 4 times. It took him 16 shots to get to 16 points, missed all 7 of his 3-point attempts. And remember, this is right in that span of games, and the Timberwolves were really miserable in the third quarter. Coming out of halftime, they've really struggled. They've been really kind of since the start of February, though. They've stabilized that. They've been a lot better coming out of halftime. And so hopefully that's not as much of an issue. Really kind of the key, as you might expect in playing the Grizzlies, is finding a way to limit John Morant. Now, the Wolves did that last game. They had the 7-point halftime lead, but then they let Jaren Jackson and John Conchar go nuts on them in the second half. So I think the approach is correct. You bottle up Morant. The Wolves now are switching a lot more on defense than they were at that time. So we'll see if that's effective against Morant. I think it's a little bit dangerous, but if the right personnel is involved in the switch, I think the Timberwolves can get away with that. Memphis is a team you can get away with playing some zone against, but you obviously have to be careful. Again, depending on the personnel, Desmond Bane can kill you from deep. Conchar can kill you from deep. But you can't let John Morant penetrate and really pick apart your defense as he can. And everybody knows how good he is at the rim, how athletic he is. And you don't want D'Angelo Russell on an island against John Morant. You just can't have that happen. Also, they need to do a good job on the glass against Memphis. And they've done okay. Again, grand scheme of things this year, the Wolves have played Memphis extremely well. But for a team that's really struggled in terms of defensive rebounding, that can't happen for the Wolves against a team like Memphis. And we talked about this before the last game. But some of the Timberwolves' weaknesses don't line up the best with Memphis's strength. Memphis remains the best offensive rebounding team in the entire league. The Wolves are 29th in defensive rebound rate. So Karl-Anthony Towns has to come to rebound, but it's not just up to him. Hopefully Jared Vanderbilt, who obviously was really banged up before the All-Star break, hopefully he got a week and a half of rest, is ready to go. They need him to rebound the ball. They need Jaden McDaniels off the bench to rebound his position well. The Timberwolves, for the most part, have gotten some pretty good rebounding out of the backcourt, out of Patrick Beverley, out of D'Angelo Russell to some extent, Jordan McLaughlin, not quite as much. But if they can get, those guys can rebound their positions adequately. They can get a little bit more from Vanderbilt, from McDaniels, maybe from Nasrid off the bench. They can't let Memphis go nuts on the offensive glass. That's such a big part of what Memphis does. And also, Memphis doesn't turn the ball over very much at all. The Timberwolves thrive on turning opponents over. Not only do they thrive on it, they rely on it. Their defensive strategy relies on creating havoc and creating turnovers for opposing offenses. Memphis doesn't turn the ball over very much. They're not a great shooting team, certainly not from deep, but in general, they're not a great shooting team. They don't shoot that many threes. They don't get to the line all that much. They're bottom 10 in terms of free throw rate. They're bottom 10 in terms of free throw percentage. They're actually bottom 3 in terms of free throw percentage. They're bottom 10 in 3-point attempts per game, 3-point rate, 3-point percentage. It's all about getting into the paint, scoring on offensive rebound opportunities, second chance opportunities, and scoring in the paint, whether that's John Morant, it's Jaren Jackson on the offensive glass. Desmond Bane is really kind of the primary long-range threat, as well as John Conchar, who we already talked about. But nobody else in this team is above average in terms of 3-point shooting percentage league-wide. So again, the zone could work. You just have to be careful. You have to make sure to rebound in the zone. You have to put a body on somebody. The Timberwolves have not done that very consistently this year, but this is the sort of team that if you can do that, you can beat them. That's probably the recipe to beating this Memphis Grizzlies team, unless they're just completely, they don't play their game, maybe first game out of the break. Your best chance to beat Memphis is to force them to shoot from the outside, and then make sure you put a body on someone, grab the defensive board, get out in transition, and score on them in transition. That's your best chance to beat them. Even though they don't shoot the ball great from deep, they do play fast, but still, I think Minnesota can win that sort of a game against Memphis as long as they clear the glass and can limit what John Morant can do against them offensively. Um, Also, if the Wolves win this game, I don't think it's ever going to come. There's really no way the Wolves end up in a tiebreaker with Memphis, but it would be nice to split the season series against the very likely second or third seed in the Western Conference in the Memphis Grizzlies. This is game 4 in the series for them. And it would be nice to be able to split that. After Memphis, of course, the Wolves are at home again on Friday night. That's the Philadelphia 76ers, and really difficult back-to-back. We'll see if James Harden suits up for the Sixers on Friday or not, but that should be a lot of fun. So after the game Thursday, we'll, of course, do the post-game pod here, as we always do, and we'll take a brief peek ahead at Wolves-Sixers on Friday night before the weekend off. No game Saturday, no game Sunday. The Wolves take on, or they play again on Monday, I should say. Let me look real quick to see who they play on Monday. But the Wolves have Saturday, Sunday off again. The weird back-to-back 2 days off and then another back-to-back. But Monday, the Timberwolves will take on, that's at Cleveland. So they got these 2 home games back-to-back, Memphis, Philadelphia, 2 days off, and then at Cleveland Monday, the old 1-game road trip, and then they get another 1-game homestand before going back out on the road to face the Thunder next Friday night, March 4th. So very weird schedule here out of the break for the Wolves. But again, we'll have the post-game pod following the game Thursday. We'll preview Friday's Wolves-Sixers game, and then, of course, next week we'll be back to the regular Monday through Friday schedule. So that's all upcoming here on the show in the next few days. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, the show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, and you can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. That's all we have for you today. Thanks again for listening to Locked On Wolves, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Also, as long as you're making Locked On Wolves your first listen, don't forget to make your second listen Locked On NBA. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.